Eurasia is not ipso facto anti-Western, but it can be an important platform for anti-Westernism more and more going forward. But it is illiberal. So I'm going to take you back to 1921, right after the Russian Revolution. This is point number 2, bullet point number 2. And there was a very substantial emigration from the former Russian Empire as a result of the revolution and civil war. More than 2 million people left, and these were often the educated people. This is a much greater exodus than in the case of the French Revolution, and moreover, in the case of the French Revolution, many of the émigrés went back once the revolutionary process settled down. In the Russian imperial or Russian Eurasia sense, the return was very slight. And this emigration, so trying to figure out what happened, anti-Soviet or anti-Bolshevik or anti-communist regime emigration for the most part, but patriotic, Russian imperial patriotic. Right? Many of them were still monarchists, not all of them, but they certainly believed in Russia, great power. And so a few had ambivalent sense vis-a-vis the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union revived great power status, right? Not under a communist regime, but they held out hope that the communist regime could evolve into something more Russian nationalist. Anyway, in 1921, a very small group of these people put out a book called Exodus to the East. It was an emigre publication in Sofia, and their argument was that Russia was not European and not Asian, but Eurasian, and that this was a civilization unto itself. It was self-sufficient economically or autarkic. It was also what they called demotic, which was a form of democracy without rule of law, or what we would call illiberal democracy. Demotic from demos, from of the people, right? Illiberal democracy. So they celebrated the fact that Russia was not a Western rule of law constitutional order. To them, this was a positive. They also said, it's not really an empire. It's a civilization unto itself. It's a symphony of peoples. Symphony from the Eastern Orthodox concept, right? And so there's a kind of apologia for empire, autarky or self-sufficiency, and illiberalism built into this ideology known as Eurasianism, introduced almost imperceptibly in this book that nobody read in 1921 called Exodus to the East. Right? This now will grow in stature over time. And this Eurasianism is extremely popular in Russia today, and not only in Russia today. You'll hear right after me Professor Mike Reynolds talk about some of these issues, right? The interface between the Slavic and the Turkic world, and part of the interface is the concept, the shared concept of Eurasianism and its illiberal quality. And so we have to be careful when we use the term Eurasia, because it's not neutral even in geographic terms, and it's associated with a political project. Now, I'm not talking about academia here. There is an academic version of the political project, which is called Central Eurasian Studies. And Central Eurasian Studies is sort of what we used to call Inner Asia. And it's flourishing predominantly at Indiana University. If you go on the website, the Central Eurasian Studies Department there, on Indiana University website is full of amazing scholarship in very difficult languages, right? And their argument is that Central Eurasia is a civilization, right? That, nomads, grasslands, horses, the steppes, shamanism, that this is not the absence of civilization, which is what the Chinese sources say and the Russian sources say. Right? That nomadic, not just sedentary people can have civilization, that they can produce a culture, that their culture is valuable, that they're not a pre-civilizational entity, right? This is the argument in academia of Central Eurasian Studies. This is a very self-conscious attempt on their part to elevate Central Eurasian studies to civilizational status, to impart a sense of civilization to the nomads, to let the nomads have the kind of, let's say, stature that accrues to those real civilizations previously that we would call Europe, Asia, or China, right? Byzantium, Rome. Okay. So that's the academic version of the project, Central Eurasian Studies, instead of Inner Asia. And there are great examples of it. It's very difficult scholarship in these multiple languages, right? Because the place is full of languages. And they have a point, that we have condescended to the nomads. We have condescended to the shamans, right? We celebrate religion, shamanism is paganism, and on it goes. Right? They have a point. I'm not adopting their point. I'm just pointing out that there is a project in academia, Central Eurasian Studies, but I'm talking about a political project in the world that takes Eurasianism, Eurasia, to justify, right, authoritarian regimes, to justify imperial conquest, to justify what's happening in Russia today, in Turkey today, in Iran today, and in China today. And so as we ourselves try to think about how to use the terminology, how to employ the concepts, we want to be careful not necessarily to validate the political projects that are associated with them. I don't know about you, but I would not prefer to live under an authoritarian regime that didn't have respect for civil liberties and property rights. So I'm very cautious in using the term Eurasia. Okay. So point number 2 is that there's a political project associated with Eurasia. And this political project is one which is unfree, and it's unfree by design. And it celebrates unfreedom as an achievement. It celebrates illiberal democracy, as they call it, demotic power. It celebrates its authoritarian regimes. It celebrates its imperial conquest by talking about a new civilization that's not really a conquest or a subordination, but is a symphony of peoples. Right? Okay.